Nobody can do it like me. Nobody. Nobody can do it like me.
Number 1, bank consolidation. Some experts are warning that bank consolidation will take place as soon as next year. Fitch Ratings has said the U.S. banking industry is geared for consolidation, in particular, community banks. Don't go thinking consolidation is a brand new phenomena, though. It's been slowly going on for decades. Last year, the NCRC released a report regarding bank closures. They found that more than 13,000 branches closed from 2008 to 2020. That's a nearly 15% loss nationally. Larger financial institutions were the main driver of that trend in 2021. The biggest banks closed branches at a much faster rate than before the pandemic. If you look at the decade from 2010 to 2020, there was a net loss of nearly 12,000 branches in the United States. That averages out to more than 98 per month. However, since the pandemic in March of 2020, more than 4,000 branches have closed. That's a rate of more than 200 branches per month. That means closures have more than doubled in the decade before the pandemic, and this decade isn't even halfway over yet. Now let's take an even further look back into banking history, and we can start to see where this trend began. Before 1977, banking system regulations put a constraint on national bank mergers. At that time, there were more than 14,000 total banking institutions, with more than 47,000 branches. By 2021, there were less than 5,000 total banking institutions. Now, starting in the 90s, small banks made up more than 84% of all banks in the United States. After banking deregulation and the Great Recession, there was even more consolidation. The split between smaller banks and larger banks is almost completely equal now. There was also an inversion in the number of small banks versus large banks. Over the last 40 years, the top 25 banks have drastically increased their share of the banking market. One of the experts warning about bank consolidation has been Ed Dowd, a former employee of BlackRock.
I still think we're going to see shotgun marriages, and we may not get down to 6, but we'll get down to, there'll be about half of the regionals will be gone, in my estimation, and or gobbled up by the bigger ones. Local banking used to be the lifeblood of the U.S. economy, and it's going to be harder to get capital if you're a small business. You're going to have to go begging to those who have all the capital. It's too much money in too few hands.
Number 2, the northern border. You've heard about cartels taking over apartments in Colorado, Haitians eating cats in Springfield, Ohio.
They're eating the dogs, the people that came in. They're eating the cats.
And migrants flooding the southern border. But have you heard about the crisis on the northern border? Just this year, U.S. Customs and Border Protection agents have had nearly 20,000 encounters with migrants between ports of entry along the northern border. That's a nearly 100% increase from last year. What's causing this? Well, that's debatable, but it's happening, and nearly 60% of those encounters were with Indian nationals. What happens when illegal crossings along the northern border catch up with those along the southern border? How can a country exist when they're being flooded from both ends? Number 3, electromagnetic pulse weapons. An electromagnetic pulse, commonly referred to as an EMP, is caused by random solar weather, such as solar flares. They're also caused intentionally by terrorists. All they have to do is detonate a nuclear bomb 300 miles up into space. When this happens, the EMP zaps the electrical grid, rendering it useless. The equipment is fried. It can't be repaired. It must be replaced. This means anything that needs electric will no longer work. Goodbye refrigeration, medical devices, heat, computers, etc. You can also say goodbye to cars, planes, trains, and boats. It's an apocalyptic scenario. In fact, within 1 year, it's estimated that an EMP would kill more than 90% of Americans. Think this is just some doomsday theory and it can't really happen? Well, it's reported that Iran has armed Hezbollah with an electromagnetic ordnance that can disable communication systems and shut down radars. Back in 2019, Trump issued an executive order and directed a multitude of agencies, as well as the Secretaries of Defense, Commerce, and Homeland Security, to, quote, prepare for the effects of EMPs through targeted approaches that coordinate whole-of-government activities and encourage private sector engagement. We know that China and Russia both have technology to launch an EMP, and it's alleged that North Korea does as well, or is mighty close to it. And you thought global tensions couldn't be any worse than they are right now. Number 4, central bank digital currencies. The U.S. Department of Treasury stated in a report that, quote, central bank digital currencies will likely need to replace stablecoins. In case you don't know, stablecoins are simply cryptocurrencies that are backed by a fiat currency such as the dollar. The government is itching to do this because the stablecoin market owns an estimated $120 billion worth of T-bills. This serves as a yield-bearing collateral for those stablecoins. More than $80 billion of those T-bills are owned by crypto's largest stablecoin company, Tether. Replacing stablecoins with a CBDC could be just the first step, with an end goal of replacing the dollar with a central bank digital currency in the United States. Take a listen to Catherine Austin Fitts as she warns about the dangers of allowing a CBDC to come into existence.
I call it digital concentration camps. This technology can turn our homes, our cars, and our communities literally into digital concentration camps. Is if you're not allowed to buy chocolate, your money won't work to buy chocolate. If you're not allowed to go more than 5 kilometers from your home, your car or your money won't work more than 5 kilometers from your home. And those rules can be dictated and controlled at a phenomenally central level. We're talking about the end of sovereignty. So this is taxation without representation. If I want to double taxes and just take it out of your account, no problem. The nominee for Office of Controller of Currency in the United States last year, fortunately she wasn't voted into the position, she wrote an article for the Vanderbilt Law Review and published it and said, it's no problem dealing with inflation, you just freeze everybody's bank accounts because with CBDC you can do that.
Number 5, alien invasion. Last year, retired Major David Grush testified before a House Oversight Subcommittee. He spoke about how the government recovered non-human biologics. In addition, he claims the government recovered crafts that had non-human pilots. Also last year, 4 unidentified objects were shot down over one weekend. Following a classified briefing to lawmakers on the matter, Senator John Kennedy said this.
That's what I took away from it today.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
Lock your doors tonight.
So what exactly is out there? Will there be some sort of alien invasion coming in the next few years? Will the U.S. government stage one, like Project Bluebeam suggests? Number 6, depressed America. What happens with a nation that is unhappy and drugged up? According to national survey data released by the CDC, 1 in 9 Americans of all ages reported taking at least one antidepressant medication in the past month. When it comes to just adults, 1 in 6 are taking antidepressants or other psychiatric drugs. Just 3 decades ago, less than 1 in 50 people did. And this depression is starting to sink in at earlier and earlier ages. During the pandemic, the monthly rate of antidepressants being dispensed to young people increased by about 64%. This increase was most drastic among young women. The monthly rate increased nearly 130% faster among 12 to 17-year-old girls and nearly 60% faster between women of the ages 18 and 25. If Americans are getting depressed and drugged at increasing rates and at younger and younger ages, what happens to America? Number 7, economic recession. A large economic recession is likely to hit the U.S. One major indicator is the inverted yield curve. Since 1955, every economic recession has been preceded by an inverted yield curve. All 10 recessions. In fact, if you go back a few decades earlier, it was inverted right before the Great Depression as well. So what is an inverted yield curve? Well, simply put, it's just a chart that measures Treasury bonds. When things are good, the Federal Reserve raises interest rates to slow people on borrowing money. When the economy is stagnant, they lower interest rates to encourage borrowing. This means the Treasury is pulling the lever on the left side of the chart, the yield. When the economy is going fine, the chart will go upwards from left to right. Investors feel that investing their money long-term isn't the most lucrative option, and they can make even more money putting it somewhere else. To encourage people to buy these bonds, interest rates for long-term Treasury bonds are high. When following the chart to the right along the maturity axis, the interest rate becomes higher the longer you invest. This is a positive yield curve. When the economy begins to slow, people will choose to put their money in what's considered a safe long-term investment. Typically, this is those long-term treasury bonds. It causes the right side of the chart to come down. It represents those long-term bond interest rates sinking. When this happens, finance people say the yield curve is flattening. At a certain point, though, this curve will keep flattening until it starts to dip down. When you look at the chart from left to right, the line is slanted downward. This is called an inverted yield curve. In simple terms, it means investors see a recession on the rise and see treasury bonds as the fastest place for their money. With so many people wanting these long-term bonds, the Federal Reserve lowers the interest rate. This is where we are right now, and it's starting to get scary. When it's inverted, it means the long-term treasury has a lower interest rate than the short-term treasury bonds. This is a paradox in the market. What happens is the investors feel the economy is going to slow even more or head into a recession. Instead of putting their money into riskier investments, more and more of them opt for long-term treasury bonds to keep their money safe. With demand so high, the Federal Reserve lowers interest rates on these bonds. Right now, we're in that spot. The yield curve is inverted, meaning a 10-year bond has a lower interest rate than a 2-year bond.
The yield curve was inverted for more than 2 years, breaking the record set back in the 70s. The yield curve briefly corrected itself before re-inverting this fall. Once again, here's Ed Dowd with a warning of how bad the economy is in light of the inverted yield curve.
And we have three indicators right now that are at major extremes: credit spreads, yield curve, and S&P volatility. And, we do long time series, and they are at values that are so off on the rubber band that when it snaps back, it's pretty extreme. We've never seen credit spreads this tight, S&P volatility this low, and with the yield curve doing what it's doing and what our economic indicators are saying. So when this, unfortunately, I don't want to be right, but when this thing does break, it could be fast, very fast.
Number 8, an unprepared military. We've had an ammo shortage in this country for some time, with Biden announcing it in a television interview last year.
This is a war relating to munitions and the running out of that ammunition, and we're low on it, and we're low on it, and we're low on it.
We don't even have enough rocket engines. That's right, rocket engines. Orders for rocket engines rose from 6,000 to 14,000 this year. That's a more than 230% increase. Think it can't get worse? The Navy has run out of pants, and they won't be getting new ones until next year. Imagine that. Not only does the Emperor Biden have no clothes, neither do his troops. And let's not forget that the U.S. Navy has shrunk from 500 ships in the 90s to just 300 today. Now, China, they have sailed right past us with nearly 370 ships. By 2035, China's Navy is expected to be 50% larger than the United States. Now, China isn't as technologically advanced as our Navy, but their sheer size is making that less and less of a concern. Number 9, the coming war the media isn't discussing. Chinese President Xi Jinping recently declared the need to, quote, comprehensively strengthen training and preparation for war. This is likely because China is getting ready to invade Taiwan, with one top U.S. admiral testifying that Xi Jinping is planning to invade by the year 2027. Another document published by the Department of Defense, titled The Ambitious Dragon, states that China will invade Taiwan by the year 2030. The year may fluctuate, but the threat is pretty much guaranteed. China is beefing up its military big time. Their official defense budget increased by more than 15% over the last few years to more than $220 billion. Now, sure, a war anywhere in the world isn't great, but why would this be such a big deal to the U.S.? Well, we guaranteed them protection back in 1979 with the Taiwan Relations Act. It states that, quote, the United States shall provide Taiwan with arms of a defensive character and shall maintain the capacity of the United States to resist any resort to force or other forms of coercion that would jeopardize the security or social or economic system of the people of Taiwan. In short, if China goes to war with Taiwan, it's going to war with the United States. We are legally obligated to protect them. But this is more than just the U.S. looking out for the little guy. It also is in our best national interest. If we defeat a Chinese invasion, it protects the Indo-Pacific area as well as our allies in Asia, Japan, Philippines, and Australia. Taiwan is vital to their defense. A Chinese takeover would threaten their security and allow China to spread its rapidly growing naval fleet all over the region. Similarly, if we let Taiwan fall, then those very allies and others around the world won't see us as reliable. It would damage our reputation, make us appear weak, and force us to prove ourselves worthy in other ways. And finally, it shows our allies that if we can protect Taiwan from a Chinese invasion, then we can do that for them as well. Now, Taiwan is a tiny island, but it serves as a proxy for our military strength. About the size of Maryland, Taiwan sits just 100 miles off the coast of China. And an invasion would be quite easy. One expert says that China could take over in under an hour.
You're still going to move amphibious assault ships across the strait. Each of them can deliver about 800 troops and, more importantly, dozens of troop transport helicopters as well as gunships to do an airborne assault. They can reach the two airports within 10 to 15 minutes. You're going to have these transport ships, mostly civilian vessels, and have been loaded with hundreds of thousands of troops, armored vehicles, tanks, logistics that you need to occupy an island of 23 million people. You're going to have bombers launched from the mainland. You're going to have the largest cruise missile and ballistic missile and rocket forces in the world, pummeling fixed radar installations, pummeling naval facilities, pummeling communication nodes. All of this can happen literally within the first 30 minutes of action in the first year of that war. Global depression right off the bat.
And that assumes it doesn't go nuclear.
That's right.
Now, don't go thinking our government is scared of this invasion from China because they love Taiwan so much or they have a duty to protect. You see, there's this little fact about Taiwan, and that is it's a technological supercenter of the world. Taiwan makes nearly 70% of all semiconductor chips in the world. They are used in everything from computers to medical devices to cell phones. Each year, nearly a third of the new computing power we rely on is fabricated in Taiwan. Let's go a little deeper. Just one company in Taiwan, TSMC, that one makes more than half of the global market for contract chip fabrication. That's a bigger dominance than OPEC has over oil, which is just 40%. As Time also noted in their article, quote, Taiwan produces almost all the most advanced processors, a market position that makes Saudi Arabia's 12% share of global oil production look unimpressive.
Which crisis is the most imminent? Let me know what you think in the comments below.
Now that you know where we've been, find out where we're going. Tune in to Ladies Love Politics, where you can stay informed without going insane.